complicated. We could always do this some other time. Huh? Yeah. Testing, 1, 2. Test, 1, 2. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 11, 10, 9, 8. Are we good? Okay. So tell me when you're ready to start. Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming today. I know it's a nice Sunday outside, and you'd be nicer to be outdoors today, whatever. It's a nice fall day. But I want to thank you for coming and being diligent in doing this. The training that we're doing together is really important. And as we go through the PowerPoint presentation, you'll see why. Essentially, everybody here, some of you have taken this before, some have never taken it before. We'll just assume everybody's never seen it, and we'll run through the whole presentation. So, and this presentation is actually being recorded, apparently, and in the future, maybe some of you can see this online or at an appropriate moment for future training. Okay, so if we can go to the first slide. Why do we need to do this? Why are we doing this training? Why do we have to do safe space training? Child abuse has become an issue in society. Probably while we're doing this presentation, there will be at least one or more occurrences of something like that happening in North America while we speak. And it really needs to be prevented. As a church, we have to be diligent and make sure that we don't have that happen in our environment. Although this presentation mostly focuses on dealing with children and young and youth, it also applies with adults dealing with adults because we can also have an abusive situation from one adult to another. So, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Apparently, there's been a study presently right now. Statistically, there's probably about 37 cases going on as we speak in North America. Just a statistical fact, and it's a plague in our society. Why are we doing this? The problem is churches are targets because they're communities of trust. It's unfortunately something that happens. People come into a church, we come together, and we trust one another. And if someone's got the wrong motives, it's a convenient way to indulge in something that is not very good. So we have to protect our church environment. That's why you're here today, because you're working with youth, you're working with children, you're working with other believers in the assembly. There's a high cost to victims of abuse. They unfortunately they'll live with the trauma for the rest of their life. And churches are not they're not exempt from that kind of situation. And we have to make sure that we're not facilitating it. Also, people who are victims of abuse very often go on to become abusers themselves. And that's a sad fact psychologically and in society. And abuse can have an impact on the family of the person that's been abused and on siblings and future children. So, and of course, it can also have an impact on our church community. There can be lawsuits. If it's proven to be true, there can be lawsuits involved. And if it's untrue, there can be false allegations that destroy the reputations of pastors and church leaders and people like yourselves. So we want to make sure that we prevent any of this from happening. So next slide, please. So why do we have to sensitize everybody to this, and why are we doing this training today? Unfortunately, Christian charities and churches are very vulnerable to this because we are communities of trust. People trust in these communities, but also we within the community trust our leaders, our co-worshipers in the church. We're also sometimes ignorant of the fact that abuse can happen in a church. Therefore, if churches are not prepared, they can lack the safeguards for protecting people and protecting ourselves as a church. And there's multiple opportunities, because how many times are we dealing with children? How many times are we dealing with teenagers? How many times are we dealing with groups of other adults as well? And churches have easy access. There's so many people that come in and out of our churches. And churches, let's face it, are desperate for volunteers and workers, right? Because, none of us are paid. So we're always desperate for people to help us. So we want to make sure that the people who are helping us have been vetted properly, and that we can trust the people we put in a position of responsibility. So what's the response then for our church? We want to prevent abuse, and we want to be diligent in how we deal with our different programs, and also how we protect the people in the church, both the children, the participants, and the church leadership as well. Okay, next slide. So the presentation is divided into 7, here it says a checklist, but it's really, the program's divided into 7 sections. Okay, it's a 7-part program. The first one is we're going to look at the policy statement for our church here, Transformation Church. We're going to define what abuse is. We're going to talk about how we screen those that we're putting in a position of trust, which is everyone that's participating. Then we've got procedures that we have in place, and we want to remind you of that we have. We want to make sure that our premises around the church are very safe. We want to train all our volunteers and our workers, and if God willing, there's no abuse, but if God forbid something happens, how do we deal with a case of abuse in the church? So we're going to talk about these 7 things. Just before I go to if you want to go to the next slide, Pastor Rich, in our last session that we did with the first group of volunteers that we trained, mentioned the fact that this is serious business. We as a church cannot operate without insurance. We have insurance that insures our building, that insures our church as a fellowship, and everything that we do here. They, as an insurance company, expect us to operate in a diligent way. And one of the things that they are very keen on is to prevent situations of abuse, And that's why. There was a case Pastor Rich was telling us about last time, and this is a big church in Ontario. It's a real case. I don't have the name of it. It wasn't mentioned. But just within the last 6 months, that church had to shut down because somebody in leadership, I believe it was someone in the pastoral leadership, had been found in a compromising position of abusing someone. And it was found out. It was proven true. And that church had to, not only did they have to get rid of their pastor or whoever that person was. But the insurance company shut down their coverage of the church. Essentially, the church had to stop functioning because and no other insurance company would touch them with a 10-foot pole. So that church had to technically disband and hopefully try and rebuild themselves. So situations of abuse are extremely serious, and that's why we do this, because we want to make sure that we're making you aware of how important it is that, the people who are working as volunteers in the church, why are we doing this? Why do we have to do all these papers, and why are we giving you training and all this? It's because it's a serious matter. Unfortunately, it's a fact of life. We have to protect the integrity of the church, but we also have to protect every one of the members of the church, including yourselves. So that's why we do it. Okay, the policy. I'm just going to read it quickly here. We've personalized it. Transformation Church has a spiritual, moral, and legal obligation to provide a secure environment for, again, it mentions children, but it doesn't exclude adults, right? It's really focused towards protection of children, but some adults maybe are vulnerable and can be taken advantage of. So, to provide a secure environment for children participating in church programs that are under the auspices and authority of the church. Child abuse, or abuse of anyone, is a criminal act, okay? As well as a violation of human conscience and dignity. It's a violation of God's moral law within the trusted context of relationship. It is criminal behavior that causes emotional, physical, and spiritual trauma to victims. It has destructive consequences for abusers also. The devastating effects on the credibility of the church, ministry, and the name of Christ make it essential that the church take all appropriate steps to prevent incidents of abuse from occurring. Okay, next slide. So that's our statement. You don't have to memorize this, but be aware that we do have a statement, policy statement. We have a policy manual on all of this, by the way, just so you're aware. We don't give it to everybody, but it exists, and the presentation we're doing today comes from that policy manual. On pages 6 and 7, we talk about what abuse is. I'm just going to read it to you quickly. Rather than read 2 pages of stuff. A definition of abuse. It's the misuse of power by a person in a position of authority. In other words, a youth leader, ministry leader, women's leader, men's leader, church leadership, elders, pastors, spouses, kids' church, youth, right? Nursery. All of these ministries that we have, are open to, and we want to prevent abuse from happening there. There's 3 types of abuse that they talk about. One is physical abuse, more of a, physical nature. There's emotional abuse, where someone can be, you can sort of make someone feel down on themselves or something like that, and make them feel badly emotionally. But the worst one of all is sexual abuse. And in North America, apparently, the statistics are that there's approximately 1 million cases of it a year in North America. That boggles the mind to me. Okay. So, next slide. So the question is, how do we screen the people who are participating as volunteers in our church? And let's face it, that's everybody. Pastors, their wives, elders, their wives, leaders of every ministry you can imagine, youth leaders, volunteers in the kids' church, and other things, nursery. So it says here, and I'm going to quote Pastor Rich's favorite word. Does anybody remember what Pastor Rich's favorite word is? All. So let's read, I'm just going to read these 3 paragraphs. How do we screen? We will screen all paid employees. Well, we don't have any paid employees, but we do have ministerial staff. We have volunteers, you and me, who work with preschoolers, children, or youth, and let's not forget, adults who could be susceptible to abuse. We will check references and do criminal record checks. That's why you're all filling out a form that we will give to the City of Montreal Police. So we will check references and do criminal record checks on all our workers for any position involving work with preschoolers, children, or youth. It could also be adults. Anyone with criminal abuse violations will not be allowed to work with preschoolers, children, or youth. Whatever. If you see some yellow highlighted stuff, it's because we had changed some of the text words or added things, and they should have been deleted before I gave you the USB key. Apologize for that. So, and then all workers fill out an application form. They're all interviewed, and they sign the ministry covenant, which is part of your packet there, agreeing to comply with church policies and guidelines. Why? Because our insurance company requires that. But at the same time, we want to be diligent in what we do as an assembly. Okay, next slide. So we've got procedures in place to make sure that we're being, to ensure that we're being diligent in how we do things. We're going to screen workers. Yeah, that's part of the process with all the paperwork we've done and the police checks. We will enforce our policies. I mean, some of the policies or procedures sound dumb. Well, they're not that dumb. There are reasons why they're there. One of the things, especially with children's ministries, we use what we call the 2-adult rule. In other words, kids' church, the older group, the younger group, there's always 2 adults that need to be there, okay, at any one time, okay? In other words, the idea is you don't leave one single person alone with the children. There's always 2 people. The other one is the 6-month rule. We don't allow just anybody to come and do volunteer work in the church. We have what we call the 6-month rule. In other words, we want to get to know you. Before you volunteer for different programs, we want to know who you are. We want to know that the leadership team of the church is comfortable with you. We're glad you're in our assembly, and but we don't take anybody that just comes off the street because they've got lots of experience. That doesn't cut it. We'd rather have someone with much less experience, but who we know, and we know they are following the Lord, and they have a heart for doing what they want to do. Supervision is maintained before and after events. Okay, I would add supervision maintained before, during, and after events. We will investigate and record all incidents. If there's an incident that looks a little strange, we want to know about it. The church leadership wants to know about it. Do not be shy to talk to one of the pastors, one of the elders in the church about suspecting something is not right. And we will report any criminal activity. We have no choice, because if abuse happens, it's a criminal matter. Now the courts are involved. The church has lawyers. We have lawyers. We have lawyers because we have insurance. And the lawyers are there to help us if ever there were a case of criminal abuse in the church. So, okay, next slide. Let's get into the nursery specifically. Just not all of you are going to be involved with that, but just so you know, manual pages 15 to 18 talk about specifically how we handle the nursery ministry. We have sign-in and sign-out sheets. Okay, there's a sheet there that says when a child comes into the nursery and one comes out. In the past, especially during the COVID era, a lot of that has sort of fallen by the wayside. We are reinstating that, and we're going to be very tough on this. Making sure every child is signed in and signed out of the nursery. Parental participation is important. In other words, the parents of the children need to be involved in helping us, making sure that their child is signed in and out. There are guidelines on what we can do. There is a washroom in there for children, for infants and babies. Don't forget, the nursery is from 0 to 3 years old at the max. So there are guidelines on what you can do and not do regarding washroom guidelines. Diaper changing, right? There are things that you can and cannot do. Obviously, we want to make sure that people who are involved with that ministry are fully aware of the emergency procedures that we have, the first aid kits that we have, and that we will have to make sure our people are CPR and first aid trained. We do this every few years, and you will hear about it in the weeks and months to come, that we will be asking for people, not everybody, but a significant number of you to volunteer to be first aiders and CPR trained. Doesn't cost anything, but church pays for it. But we need people who can help, and of course that's important even in the middle of a service, regular service, not just nursery and kids church. And of course there are cleanliness guidelines for a nursery. That's really important as well, and all of that's detailed in the manual from page 15 to 18. Okay, next. Kids church. Some of you might be involved with that. Pages 19 to 24 of the manual talk about how we deal with kids church. Again, just bringing it up, 2 adult rule in kids church at all times. There has to be 2 adults. Open doors. We don't close doors on the rooms. Doesn't matter how noisy the kids get. The doors must always be left open so that nothing is hidden behind doors. Parental permission for exceptions in certain cases. There might be those special cases we'll have to deal with certain children or the parents of certain children. Volunteers, you guys. Age of volunteers, related volunteers, we have to look at that. Preschool classes, okay, in the kids' church. At least 1 adult female. Remember we said we had to have 2? At least 1 of them must be female, okay? The classes have to be supervised at all times. We can't leave the kids alone, and we have to have 2 people at all times. Proper and improper display of affection. In the manual, it talks about that. It's one thing to hug a kid. It's another thing to over-hug the child, right? So it goes clearly into all those details. Discipline and classroom management, it also talks about that as well. I'm not going to bore you with this today, but for those who will work in the kids' church areas, we can make these pages available to you in the weeks to come if anybody wants to see those, so you can at least read them and know what's involved. Next slide, please. Special events. When there are special events, activities that are conducted away from the church property must be approved by the church leadership. The church leadership needs to know about it. We don't want to find out that all of a sudden half a dozen kids were taken to some event and nobody in the church leadership knew about it. So that's very, very important. Parents of those children must be notified at least 1 week prior to the outing, because they have to provide written approval and permission for their child to participate. Proper written consent and medical release forms are required for each child participating in field trips and special events. Those forms, we can show you what they are at a later time. All trips and outings must be supervised by a minimum of 2 approved, unrelated adult leaders. Now, that means, for example, if the two kids' church leaders, if it's husband and wife, well, they need a third person that's not related to them to help them out, because two of them have to be unrelated. Okay? So you can't have a married couple who are working together alone. It has to be more than two. When we're transporting children, is involved. It's in an activity. All drivers must have a valid driver's license, and a current automobile insurance. Okay, so that's very important for legal reasons. The number of persons per car must never exceed the number of seat belts in the vehicle. Okay, my children, who are now adults and parents on their own, can tell you stories that we've heard in the past where a minivan full of young kids and teenagers, far outnumbered and doubled the number of seat belts in a minivan. So we don't want any of that in this generation. So those are days from the past. Okay. Overnight events. All overnight activities must be pre-approved by the church leadership. The eldership, pastors need to know about it ahead of time and approve it. Proper written consent and medical release forms are required for each child participating in the overnight events. The parents will be provided with those sheets to fill out and bring back before the event goes on. All overnight activities must have a minimum ratio of 1 leader for every 5 children. Okay, minimum of 2 leaders at all times. When only 2 leaders are required, again, they must be unrelated. Okay, so if it's a couple, then make sure there's at least 3. Each leader must have an assigned group of children for whom they will be responsible for during the overnight event. All supervising adults must be approved volunteers. You can't ask your sister-in-law, your brother-in-law, my cousin's really good at stuff like that. No, it has to come from, they cannot be part of the leadership of the church, the volunteers who are running the event. Okay, next. Special event forms. Some of the forms that we have, when the time comes, there's a waiver and medical release form. We quickly talked about that. That's in the manual. There's an accident report form if somebody gets hurt in one of the activities, zip lining somewhere or whatever, we need to fill out a report so that it's well documented. Now, if there's a high-risk activity waiver, if you're going to go through the Lachine Rapids on one of those things for people who are adults, there's a high-risk activity waiver form where everybody's got to sign that. And there's one for people under 18, so the parents sign it, okay? So we have all these forms available to you for special events. Next slide. Safe premises. One of the things we're trying to make sure is in our premises, the building conforms to standards, okay? We have emergency exits. We've got fire extinguishers that are verified regularly. Smoke detectors work regularly. Emergency alarms work. Fire alarm works. All that good stuff. They come and inspect us, so we make sure we do all that. Everything is in full view in the building. Emergency exit plan, that's actually one of the things that we have to do. We have to start posting some of our emergency exit plans. First aid supplies and practitioners, so we're going to get some people retrained. During COVID, a lot of that sort of people, our certificates expired, so we need to bring that back now. So some of you everybody will be contacted, but it's not everybody that wants to do that or feels comfortable doing it, but we encourage you to do it. And we also have to make sure that transportation is safe where applicable if we're going off to an event somewhere or something like that. Don't want some rickety old van like I have to be used for an event. So next. Recruitment of volunteers. Everybody that's here today, including me, All workers fill out an application form. Most of you have already filled out. If not, we'll make sure you fill it out before you leave today. Provide a criminal record check. That's the police check form that's in your dossier there. Most of you have already given me that. That will be done every 3 years. It's not going to be a yearly thing. Every 3 years. So the next time you're going to have to fill out the police check form will be in 2027. Okay, everybody here today. I'm going to be the year before that. So it's a 3-year cycle. But the training that we do today will be done every year. This presentation, and at the end of the meeting, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask anything before this presentation's over. Everybody will be interviewed. It's a very informal process, but there is a form that you fill in, and you will also sign a ministry covenant form that says, in our church, everything is to glorify God and the Lord Jesus Christ. And, you put your name and you sign that because, in other words, we want people who are faithful to the Lord to be our volunteers, not just people who walk in off the street. We sign the ministry covenant, agreeing to comply with church policies and guidelines. We also want to deal with, God forbid, criminal convictions. Now, if any of our volunteers, any of our individuals have been convicted of a crime in the past involving child abuse, guaranteed you will not be allowed to work with children in this church, okay? In other words, if there was incest, rape, child pornography charges, kidnapping, anything like that, no, you're not going to work here as a volunteer. However, there are other criminal convictions. Somebody was caught driving under the influence or 15 years ago or something. Well, is it pertinent today in doing what we're doing when they obviously don't do that anymore? Obviously, each case has to be looked at, but discretion is permitted. But not that we want drunk people in our church, but we want to save them. We don't want to facilitate their access to people here. So, okay, and adult victims of child abuse. If you yourself were ever a victim of child abuse as a child, we would want to know about it, but it's purely on a voluntary basis that you inform us. It would be a good idea if you told us. It would be kept in strict privacy because these things can have consequences in the future. Disclosure is advised, but it doesn't exclude you from being a volunteer working with youth and children and adults, children in the nursery and stuff like that. Training of our workers. All ministry leaders must be approved by the director of the department in the ministry of the church involved. So that sort of, in other words, we don't just take anybody in off the street who just says, oh, I can really do something to help you. No, there's pretty much a 6-month process. We want to get to know you first. Approved volunteers will have completed a screening process that includes regular attendance to the church. Again, here's the 6-month rule. We want to know who you are. Or having been received into official membership into the church. And completing a ministry volunteer application form. That's part of your application packet that you have. And interview with somebody in the leadership. Okay, all forms will be kept confidential and indefinitely based on the statute of limitations, and that's based on laws and how insurance companies regard things and police records and all of that. And all workers receive training and safe place policy and procedures yearly. We're going to do this exact presentation a year from now. So be ready a year from now. But that's the only thing you'll have to do then. You won't have to sign any forms. Other than the attendance sheet, you will not need to do another police check for 2 more years, 3 years from now. Next slide, please. What happens if there is a case of abuse? Incidents must be reported immediately to the senior pastor. Like, we need to know. This cannot be a rumor that is going through the church. If we hear of something, the senior pastor, the pastors of this church, need to know about it. We have to be informed. We will document any allegations that we get. There are forms on how to do that. They're in our manual there, page 40, I believe. And we will follow the procedure on page 40. And is there one more page, Mark? Okay, and I think this is the last slide. How do we respond to a case of abuse? All allegations, even if it's suspected or whatever, need to be taken seriously, absolutely seriously. Situations must be handled forthrightly or, very promptly, quickly, with due respect for people's privacy, as much as possible, the person that's the abuser and the persons that believe there is abuse, the victim, right? And with so privacy and confidentiality. This is something that we do not go around and chatter about. The full cooperation must be given to civil authorities. That's our lawyers and the police, if it gets to that point, under the guidance of our church lawyer. Adequate care must be shown for the well-being of victims. Obviously, we want to protect people. That's our top priority. The victim must not be held responsible in any way. And immediately contact the insurance carrier. Obviously, that is the responsibility of the pastors of the church to deal with our insurance company. If we have a claim, if we have a report fine, and if police, they will contact the police. We don't do that individually. That's all done by our lawyers. And the last thing is avoid public comments. This is not the time to start spreading chatter to your friends on social media. Look what happened in my church. This is absolutely private within the church. For all we know, it could be false. So there's no way we want to. The last thing we want are false rumors out on social media and or on the 6 o'clock news, right? So avoid public comments. That's your responsibility, each and every one of us, in a suspected case, something like this. Okay, I believe that's the last slide. This is important. All of you are here. We don't do this presentation or give you this to make you feel uncomfortable. It's to show you how important volunteering in a church is. People trust us as an assembly. They trust the volunteers, which is every one of us here in the church. And we want the reputation of our church, of its leadership, of its pastors, to be protected. And we want to make sure that you yourselves are also protected. And that's why we do this. So that's sort of the last slide and the last words I have on this. If anybody's got any questions, just let me know and I'll see if I can answer it. Yeah. I can't hear you, sorry. Yeah. How do you deal if something shows up on social media or if something comes up in social media? Comments, don't repeat them. Don't spread them. Unless you know the details of the thing, don't respond. The leadership of the church will deal with that. It's not up to you to say, oh, no, that can't be true. Well, what happens if it is true? You know, God forbid. But no, it's like social media is the scariest thing out there for something like this. Let's not repeat rumors, false claims, claims that might be true. That's the last thing. Look, we've been here 40 years almost, and we've never run into a situation like this to our knowledge. So we want to make sure that we don't open the door to anything either. That's why we want everybody in leadership, everybody who are part of the volunteers of the church to help us and making sure that like the best thing for something like this is prevention. If we are diligent in what we do, and some of it sounds like it's overkill, it's not. It's because we want to make sure that we are diligent in preventing issues of abuse of any type, whether it's a child, a newborn, a teenager, an adult who's in a women's group, a men's group, whatever group, within our, when we do pastoral care. All of these things, we are trying to make sure that we are doing so diligently, and we're doing it for the Lord. So, does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, thanks. Any other questions? Then that's it. Thank you very much for taking your time, and it's a nice day out, so go and enjoy. Thank you.